Hello, I'm Stephen Apcon.
And I'm Marcina Hale.
And it's our pleasure to welcome, actually, we should be the ones who are being welcomed because we're here with Julie Holland, who has had a fascinating career, written many books, including the latest book, Good Chemistry, The Science of Connection from Soul to Psychedelics. Welcome, Julie.
I would say thanks for having me, but I'm just going to say you're welcome for being had. Welcome to my home.
We're sitting out on this beautiful deck on this glorious day and the sounds of nature around us, and really happy to be here. So thanks.
And if you hear a lawnmower, etc., that's just, it's the unnatural sounds
It's
that
life
sometimes spring
happening.
up. It is life.
Yeah. And speaking of life, we're definitely going to get into talking to you about your work with MDMA, with psychedelics, with MAPS, that whole world. But even before we go to the substances and to the therapeutic process that's involved with them, what is it that we're after? Because in Good Chemistry, you talk a lot that's outside of talking about psychedelics. So what is it that we're after in these processes?
Yeah, so the original title for Good Chemistry was actually going to be One or Oneness, and it was like a unified theory of oneness or a unified theory of connection. So I was really circling around this idea of feeling hooked in, feeling a part of something. What does that feel like? Is that good for us? And, I think that when we are separated from the people we love or from ourselves, we are in a state of unrest. We don't feel whole. If we feel connected to something bigger than we are, or perhaps we feel cared for, by a family member or by a community, someone's got your back. That feeling of belonging, being attended to, being cared for, it's good. It creates good chemistry. It's good for our bodies. It's sort of an anti-inflammatory state. I teach a lot in Good Chemistry about the difference between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And, everybody knows about fight or flight, but the flip side of fight or flight is really how we survive. And it's not about running away or attacking. It's actually about staying and being present and cooperating and collaborating. And not being afraid because you are part of a community or part of something bigger. Maybe you're just part of a couple or anything, part of a team. So with psychedelics, I think what happens for some people, and I have been lucky enough to experience this, is that at the peak moments of a psychedelic experience, there is this overwhelming sense of connection, of belonging, of wholeness, of feeling like everything is connected, and I am a part of that everything. And it's a blissful feeling, and it's not, it's, yes, we can get it from psychedelics, but we can also get it from meditation, from sex, if we're lucky enough to be in a spaceship and we look down at the planet and, everyone on that planet is together. So, if you shift your perspective enough, you can find oneness and connection. But the way Good Chemistry is set up is that I start with the self, oneness of the self. And then I go to oneness in a dyad, and then oneness in the family, and then connection in the community, and then there's a chapter on connecting with nature. And then the last chapter is about connecting with the cosmos and the universe and, feeling like a child of the universe. And yes, I have that perspective because I was fortunate enough to have really intense mystical experiences with psychedelics at a pretty young age. So there's this sort of, self, and then it expands outwards. I'm very into the connecting with nature part lately, as you can hear from being out here. There's goats and roosters around and birds. If you hear something that sounds like a toddler being gored, it's just the goat next door, so don't worry. It's a very particular, it really took me a long time to ignore that because I feel like I was sort of physiologically wired to respond to that kind of a sound. I mean, it really does sound to me like a child in distress.
Well, it sounds like the goat's trying to talk to the rooster, and the rooster's
the rooster's crowing in.
Right. They're both like, when will you just stop already? Enough.
Or we're not understanding the language yet, maybe, perhaps, too.
Right. Just lessons, or just language lessons happening over there. So yeah, this idea of connection and oneness, it's really the foundation of the ideas that went into writing about good chemistry. The truth is, I didn't want psychedelics on the cover, and I didn't want this to be a book about psychedelics. I really wanted this to be a book about connection and oneness. But as the more I wrote, the more I talked about it, I just kept coming back to things like MDMA and psilocybin and ayahuasca, and also for me, cannabis. If anyone knows my work, you know that I am cannabis literate. I am pro pot. And I do consider cannabis to be a psychedelic. For me, it certainly puts me in touch with my own body. I get more sort of somatically oriented, and I become more aware of my kinesthetics and my posture and things like that. But it also helps me feel very connected to nature, or to my partner, Jeremy, or to my kids. So for me anyway, cannabis really does facilitate connection and wholeness and unity. But these other drugs, I would say, do it to a larger extent.
Well, it's interesting, too, because coming from the medical field and using these terms, how do we integrate the difference between the diagnostic view and the view that you're even talking about right now?
Yeah, well, so yes, I'm a medical doctor, and I do approach things from a medical view. And it's probably better to lead with my bona fides than to lead with, yes, I've had psychedelic experiences. So I will just quickly mention that I went to University of Pennsylvania undergrad, Temple University Med School. I did my psychiatric residency at Mount Sinai, and then I spent 9 years as the attending psychiatrist at the Bellevue Psychiatric Emergency Room. And every Saturday night and Sunday night for 9 years, I ran the Psych ER. So I'm comfortable seeing people in altered states and seeing people in extremis, and whether they are manic or they're terribly depressed and suicidal, or they're altered, because of their crack use or alcohol use or anything like that. So I'm comfortable interacting with people who are in altered states, partially because I've had experience with altered states, and somebody who's in a manic episode is very reminiscent of somebody who is having psilocybin or LSD. So I'm comfortable sort of trying to interact with people like that. But anyway, in terms of diagnostic classification and being a psychiatrist, we have this idea that if you are anxious, you take this medicine, and if you're depressed, you take this medicine, and you do that every day, right? These are daily doses of medicine, and you will take it for decades. But the truth is that a lot of what causes our anxiety and our malaise and our unrest is this basic disconnection, being disconnected from ourselves, from nature, from our community, from our family. So it is often, I used to think that things were very biological and very pharmacological, and you have a chemical imbalance and your chemistry is off, and if we manipulate your chemistry, you'll feel
that's
better.
What's being taught to us.
That is definitely the party line. And it really is sort of backwards thinking, like, okay, these medicines do make you feel better, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you had an imbalance of something. Like cookies taste good. That doesn't mean you have a sugar deficit, So I think that while the daily dose does help people to some degree, sometimes it just makes it so that they don't mind being disconnected. They don't notice that they're disconnected, or they have an easier time repressing their memories of trauma. And what the psychedelics do is they enable memories of trauma, and even more than enabling the memories, they will potentially enable a state of sort of reconciliation with the trauma, or reintegration or reformulating the idea of a trauma. I mean, I'm particularly interested in MDMA assisted psychotherapy, which you could not design a better catalyst for psychotherapy. Because it enhances serotonin, there is a sense of satiety and ease. You're a lot less anxious. Right. Excuse me, but because it also increases oxytocin,
right,
you are more open. It is more of a teachable moment.
Right.
There is more neuroplasticity. Mm-hmm. You trust and are bonding more with the therapist. So a lot of things happen in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy that don't happen in regular therapy.
I think that goes back to the question, like when doctors or people are not familiar with the difference between them, they're wondering, what is different from what MDMA from an SSRI. And how do you explain an experience that they
Yeah.
haven't had?
Well, the metaphor that I often give for the difference between SSRI and MDMA is you can keep sweeping the dirt under the carpet, under the carpet, under the carpet, and you'll have one very lumpy carpet, but your floor seems clean. Or you could take the carpet out back, beat the heck out of it, vacuum the entire floor, put the carpet back down. So the daily dose is just something so that you don't mind how you're feeling, and you don't mind how your life is, and you don't have to worry too much about the future or regret too much about things that happened in the past. And it is just sort of like tamping it down and sweeping things under the rug. And the truth is, especially for instance, post-traumatic stress disorder, you can take a lot of different medications to treat the symptoms. There's insomnia, there's anxiety, there's hopelessness, suicidality, and there's different medicines for all of those things. Right. But the truth is that if you can fully debrief and make sense of the trauma, you don't need any of those medicines. Right. So what we're seeing in the MDMA studies is that after 2 or 3 MDMA-assisted psychotherapy sessions, people don't need their medicines anymore for PTSD. And really impressive, they actually don't meet criteria for the illness anymore, that they don't have the symptoms that they did, that brought them into the study. But I will tell you some new information that no one's really talking about yet, but they will. I'm working on a paper that's going to be published, which what we did was we took everybody in all the studies who had received MDMA, and we broke them down into people who had to taper off their meds before they could be in the study, and people who didn't have to taper off meds because they weren't on any meds. And it turns out that the people who'd been medicated for years and years did not have as good a response as the people who hadn't been medicated for years and years.
That makes sense.
That kind of breaks my heart, that like, if you're being inadequately or inappropriately treated for decades, that when you finally arrive at something that really could work to cure you, to actually take away the illness, you're at a disadvantage if you've already been sort of pharmacotized, for years on end.
And we were just talking to a medical doctor that was talking about how the people, in one way, are driving the prescription of the drugs. They're like requesting it. And yet it's challenging, because I know in a study that we came up with recently, we were understanding that the SSRIs are not just affecting the serotonin in the brain, but in all the organs, which could actually lead to some damage in the organs.
Yeah, well, the easiest thing to look at is back when they were giving fen-phen to people. It was just way too much serotonin in the long run. And so people had heart valve problems and pulmonary problems. So yes, there are serotonin receptors. One of the things the serotonin does is it controls blood pressure. So there may be significant disadvantages to being on these meds long term. I mean, the other thing is there's something called tardive dysphoria, which is this idea that the longer you're on these antidepressants, the worse your mood gets. It's a terrifying thought that this is real. And I wrote about this in Moody Bitches quite a bit. Moody Bitches is a book for women. The subtitle is The Truth About the Drugs You're Taking, the Sleep You're Missing, the Sex You're Not Having, and what's really making you feel crazy. And in Moody Bitches, I talk about how over-pathologized, over-diagnosed, and over-medicated women are. Women who are anxious, who are upset, who can't sleep well, who don't have much libido. There are all sorts of reasons for these symptoms, and it's not always a chemical imbalance. Sometimes it's that the way you are living is unhealthy, and you are trying to adapt to an unhealthy environment, in which you need to get out of your office and be in the sunshine. You need to be near nature. You need to be eating whole foods, not processed foods. All sorts of like very basic things that you would get in any sort of women's magazine.
Well, it's interesting that the chemical imbalance is always something that comes up, but we do understand too that one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies is your gut and your heart and your brain, right?
Right.
Your
So
body.
I educated people about the microbiome and how important it is to sort of live an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, basically, and that these things can also help your mood. I kind of forgot where I was going with the
Right.
over-pathologized, over-medicated, over-diagnosed, but now at least we need to add to the list that it may be that the longer you're on these medicines that don't necessarily work very well, the less you're going to respond to medicines that we are showing do work really well. So it's a pretty big concern of mine, and it's a relatively new concern. A lot of people who are interested in microdosing, for instance, or people who would like to take ayahuasca, they are taking medicines that get in the way of them, experiencing these other drugs or plant medicines. So one of the things that I'm trying to do, but it's really tricky because it's not yet legal. All these things are they're in the medical research stage, right? We've got research going on with psilocybin and depression, psilocybin with end-of-life anxiety, psilocybin with obsessive compulsive disorder, psilocybin with smoking cessation, with alcoholism. These are all clinical research trials that are going on now. And then you've got MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder, and also for anxiety or social anxiety associated with autistic spectrum disorder. There is going to be a study soon with MDMA and body dysmorphic disorder and sort of anorexia and body issues. So there's all this tremendous research going on, but yes, the customer is driving that also. I would say, okay, so you have direct-to-consumer advertising, and you've got people asking their doctors for antidepressants.
Well, and they've been demonized. The psilocybin and the psychedelics have been demonized, so they don't. It's even to go there.
They had been, right? So I mean, I've been a psychiatrist since the 90s, basically, and the 90s were great boom town for psychiatry, boom time for psychiatry, because prescribing just went up and up and up. And then we had 9/11, and prescribing just off the hook. It became absolutely normal and okay to take antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, sleeping pills. And then we got into this weird place where people started taking antipsychotics to manage their anxiety and their depression. And that's one of the things that made me want to write Moody Bitches, was that I was very unhappy with the way that women were being medicated. So, and there's all these sort of hormonal issues. But that's the subtitle of Moody Bitches. The last part is, what's really making you crazy or making you feel crazy. And that the last chapter of Moody Bitches was where I started to write about disconnection, and that this is the thing that's making us feel crazy, is that we are not in line with our own intuition, with our own authenticity, and we're not connected to nature, and we're out of the sort of the cycles of the moon and the tides and the seasons, and we eat fruit in, when it's not in season because it's been flown halfway around the world and things like that. And so the idea is just to be more, to eat locally and to eat seasonally. There's a time for that there are times in the year when you should be having carbs and starches, and times in the year when you shouldn't, and things like that. Like, just to be more natural, basically,
Ultimately more connected.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about a lot, you say loneliness is a silent killer, and it starts with connection to self.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things that disconnect us from ourselves. I think one of the major things is shame. We do something that we learn is bad and we shouldn't do it, but we want to do it, so we hide it. And so we're sort of hiding a part of ourselves from other people because it's bad, but then we also sort of hide it from ourselves so that we can't see it, so we don't think we're bad. And that's really where it starts. Is like, the first secrets are really from the self. And then when you have trauma, a lot of times people will sort of separate off, oh, well, that wasn't really me, that wasn't who I was then, that didn't happen, or it didn't really happen to me. But yes, it did happen to you. But there's all this repression that goes into not thinking about it, not dealing with it, pushing it down.
But as a psychiatrist, how do you prescribe connection?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
You'd be put out of business pretty fast.
Well, the truth is that a lot of my patients, a lot of them are women in their mid to late 30s, early 40s, and they want a family. They want a child. They want a partner. They don't necessarily want to do it alone. They feel like they're running out of time. It's a terrible feeling, and it's a very lonely feeling. And, the more that you want something, the more you sort of look a little thirsty, and then, nobody really wants to give you the thing you want. So it ends up being a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But also, being on SSRIs, which is what most of these women are on,
Right.
they have less drive to go
Right.
out and get what they want and fix what they want, because the pills are saying, like, it's good,
okay enough.
I'm all good, whatever, you don't need anything. I mean, that, you know, if serotonin is all about satiety and satiation, you're already sated. You know, what are you going to go out and get? So there's a little bit of complacency. And then the other thing is, a lot of these women are on birth control pills, which to some degree, not exactly, tricks your body into thinking you're already pregnant. So why would you want to go out and find a mate if you've already got a bun in the oven, as they say? So between being on SSRIs and being on birth control pills, which describes easily 70-80% of the women in my practice,
Wow.
that's going to get in the way of them getting the thing that they actually want.
Wow.
So, especially since Moody Bitches, I spend more time helping people get off their meds. But I have to make the caveat, which I hope is obvious to anyone listening, that if you have bipolar disorder, you really may need to take mood stabilizers. And if you have schizophrenia, you really may need to take antipsychotics. And there are certain factions of people with psychiatric complaints who aren't going to be able to really avail themselves of MDMA-assisted therapy or psilocybin-assisted therapy or ayahuasca or LSD or Ibogaine. But these things that I am mentioning, they have tremendous efficacy, and a lot of them are fairly safe. And from a physiological toxicity point of view, they are absolutely safe. From a behavioral point of view, you have to worry about behavioral toxicity. I mean, the example I would give is, like, if you're crossing the street but you're high on mushrooms, the stoplights and the traffic lights may look so beautiful and entrancing to you that you forget that red means stop and you can't cross the street right now. So that would be an example of behavioral toxicity. You know, the mushrooms won't kill you, but crossing the street without looking both ways would kill you.
Or SSRIs with MDMA can be.
So yeah, there's this whole very complicated, not completely understood, at least not by me yet, issue of what is the interaction between these prescription medicines and the plant medicines. And now we know that ayahuasca, for example, there are a lot of medicines you can't take for ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, for those of you who don't know, it's a tea, it's a brew of two plants that creates a psychedelic experience that typically lasts maybe 6 hours or so. But DMT is something that is not orally active. You have enzymes in your stomach that break it down so you can't experience it orally. So if you want to experience DMT, you have to smoke it or perhaps lick a toad.
Or wait till maybe end of life, right?
5-MeO DMT. Or wait till a tremendous experience where you, childbirth is one, end of life, where your brain will actually generate this on its own. But the tea enables DMT to be orally active because it incapacitates these enzymes. So you get an orally active DMT experience, which unlike maybe 15 or 30 minutes if you smoked it, you will get 4 to 6 hours if you ingest it orally. But you can't mix prescription antidepressants with ayahuasca, and you can't mix stimulants with ayahuasca, and there are certain medicines that you really cannot mix with MDMA, either because it is dangerous or because it will prevent the MDMA from going where it needs to in the brain to do its job. So with the MDMA studies, I was a medical monitor for many MDMA PTSD studies, and we had to taper people off their antidepressants prior to the MDMA. And this is what I'm talking about later, where we took the data to look at who we tapered and who we didn't. And as I feared, the tapers take a long time. It's very hard to get off antidepressants. You really need to do it gradually. And some people get depressed and need to go back on their medicines. But some people have these experiences with psychedelics where they don't need their medicines anymore because they have processed very deep emotional wounds.
Is it challenging, because I know that there is an addiction to SSRIs, and that the process of getting off of them can be challenging, but at the same time, once you're past it, it's almost like the challenge of getting off of them can create a depression to make you go back on it. But
Absolutely.
If you work with a therapist to get off it, that on the other side of it, there could be more benefits being off them than on them, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go back on them. Is that
right?
correct?
I think that this is really important to understand, is that there is an acute withdrawal syndrome that happens if you taper too quickly. And in that acute withdrawal syndrome, all your depression symptoms come back with a vengeance. And so when people start to pull off their medicines and they have terrible symptoms, what most people think is like, oh my gosh, I guess I really needed this medicine because this is what happens without it. But it's actually a temporary state that isn't necessarily how you would feel down the road. So if I have a patient who does want to taper off antidepressants, I do it very slowly over a period of months, not days, not weeks, but over a period of months. And then ideally, in a perfect world for the MDMA study, we would have had people taper for months and then be off for months prior to doing the study.
Yeah.
But we did it much faster.
Okay.
But this whole issue of interactions between prescription medicine and psychedelic medicine needs to be fleshed out. I often have medical students or psychiatric residents, people who are residents in psychiatric programs, reaching out to me.
It's your next book.
What should I do? What sort of research should I do? And I've had a couple of people where I've specifically said, this is something we need to look at, especially with microdosing. Now, many people are taking small doses of psychedelics every 3 or 4 days in an effort to get off their antidepressants. So they're taking it while they're on antidepressants.
Wow. Okay.
And there is sort of accumulating data that some people are able to get off their medicines while microdosing. Other people choose to get off their medicines before they microdose.
Okay.
But it gets pretty complicated.
I also had a question about the medications with HIV. There's different, I think, concoctions that people work with that. Do you have any?
Well, the thing that makes it very hard to say with any definitive answer is that there's no research on this. It's, no one is funding research to look at what happens when you combine this and that. There was some research looking at combining HIV meds with cannabis just to make sure that it is safe, and it is. But there really hasn't been research looking at MDMA and HIV meds or psilocybin HIV meds. But there was, I wrote in Good Chemistry about some research that was going on with people who had HIV who were feeling very demoralized, and they were doing an MDMA study with them. So my sense is that it is not dangerous to combine HIV meds with MDMA, but I don't want to give anybody medical advice that is incorrect.
And that was a group study.
If I can help it. Yeah, it was a group study.
Which is interesting also because as you talk about the emerging therapies and the MAP studies and what's being pushed or what's being processed through the FDA is a medical model with a single patient,
right?
Two clinicians,
right?
But a single patient, and
we're
talking about connection.
It's an all-day affair. Yeah.
Right.
So yes, all the research is based on the same model, which is a male-female co-therapist pair. And then the patient has a lot of therapy leading up to the session, and then a very long day. It's an 8-hour day of the session, and then a lot of therapy after the session. That cycle gets repeated either 2 or 3 times, depending on the study, over, say, anywhere between like a 4 and 8 week period or something. Now, usually out in the wild, if somebody's going to take MDMA, they wouldn't do it that often. Hopefully they would spread it out more than that. But for this study, these were people who'd never had MDMA before, or who were essentially MDMA naive. If they had it, it was a long time ago. Sorry, I'm getting all wound around. What was the question? What was we?
Just about the model. The
right.
model.
So individual. Right.
Yeah.
So this model is not sustainable. Is the short answer, right? 2 clinicians, 1 patient, 8 hours. The whole
not sustainable
protocol.
Economically.
It's not sustainable economically. It's I think what will eventually happen is first of all, you could certainly just have 1 clinician. You don't need 2. It's nice to have a male, female. You've sort of recreated somewhat of the family. You can project father issues onto the male and mother issues onto the female. But there also are times when somebody's a sexual assault survivor. They don't want a man in the room. Then we have 2 women. I think eventually what you're going to see is small groups. Group therapy, the sort of ayahuasca model is that it's done in a group, right? That there is maybe a retreat you go to for the weekend. You drink the tea on Friday night and Saturday night. You process as a group Saturday morning, Sunday morning. And that really works. And in an ayahuasca circle, you may have like 8 or 12 or even 20 people in a room, and you've got like one leader or shaman and maybe 1 or 2 helpers, and that works. So I think that you will see over time that there will be more group sessions happening.
And how do you see the road to getting there? What do you see right now with the
From here to there.
From here to there.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting time. First of all, it's such a great time to be a psychiatrist, right? Because, we've got ketamine and MDMA and ayahuasca and psilocybin. It's a lovely time to have new medicines at our disposal. Right now, they're all research oriented, but people are already using them and having great results. There are a number of companies who are trying to develop these medicines either into being FDA approved medicines in America, or I think it's EMA approved in Europe, European Medical Agency. I imagine I'm not saying it exactly right, but I believe it's called EMA. So there are European players, there's American players, there are
Canadian.
There are people in Canada. There are people who are trying to make MDMA into a medicine. That's MAPS, right? The Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. I have known the sort of founder of MAPS for 35 years now, and sort of been. I was going to say peripherally involved, but like essentially involved in being medical monitor for some of the earlier studies. Now I'm a medical advisor because there is like a team of medical monitors, because these are multi-center trials now going on with MDMA to treat post-traumatic stress disorder. There are for-profit groups that are developing psilocybin. There are public benefit corporations that are developing MDMA, that are developing psilocybin. There are companies that have like intellectual property and multiple patents. And there are definitely some companies that are trying to sort of take the psychedelic out of the medicine, that they somehow want to still give people the healing experience without having the mystical experience. And whether that is possible or not. Now, it may be. Ibogaine is an excellent example. Ibogaine is a root from Africa that helps people quit using opiates. And it really does sort of reset their receptors so that they no longer have an opiate-dependent brain. And that resetting is amazing. But the other thing that happens is they have very intense psychedelic visions for the better part of a day, and sometimes even more than a day. So there's a company that has sort of figured out a way to, make Ibogaine sort of less psychoactive, but still have that resetting. And it may work fine pharmacologically, but you're sort of missing the part where a person has this complete life review and an overview effect of their own lives, where they've been going, where they're getting stuck, where they're going in circles. That is an integral part of changing behavior. The psychedelics are really catalysts for behavioral change, and that makes them absolutely unique. In psychiatry, we spend a lot of time talking to people and prescribing for people, but they don't always change their behavior very much.
Or their perspective.
Like, it is what it is, and so you're just sort of, it's like somebody when they have legs that are 2 different lengths, and so you give them a shoe that's a particular height, and then they can walk okay. But anytime they take that shoe off, they're like, oh gosh, wow, look, my legs really are 2 different lengths. So, to do something where you can actually even out the legs and you don't need the shim anymore, like it's, the basic structural changes in how you think about yourself, how you deal with your trauma, how you deal with other people. And because these are neuroplastic agents, I feel like that's very important, that especially with MDMA, it puts the brain in a particularly plastic place where it can get reworked a little bit. There's a little bit of rewiring and restructuring and reconfigurating. And with memories, there's a reconsolidating. Every time you remember something, it's like taking out a file and looking at it and putting the file back, right? That's what we always thought. It's not. It's taking out the file, looking at it, writing on it a little bit, changing it a little bit, and then putting the file back. So if you have an opportunity, you can rewrite the narrative a little bit. You can't take away that this horrible thing happened to you,
right,
but you can add to the memory I could not have done anything. It wasn't my fault. I couldn't move. I am blameless. Whereas before, that memory had, what were you wearing? What were you doing? Maybe you brought this on yourself. You know, if you have a reconsolidation where you're not beating yourself up about getting beaten up, you're on your way to healing. So these are really transformative medicines, and they're doing a lot of heavy lifting in therapy, which is getting people to really look at these deeply hidden kind of malignant things that need to be, removed and excised and examined. I often will describe it a little bit as it's like anesthesia for surgery. You know, when you go in for therapy every week, they are trying to get down to like that tender thing and pull it out. But like, no, I don't really, you don't really talk about that. You skirt, you make a joke, you kind of make fun. Oh, we ran out of time.
Is the hour over?
Yeah, I'll talk about it next time. And then, I canceled next time. And then you get back in a month and you talk about something else. And this happens all the time, that it's too tender. They can't get to it. You got to peel away the onion, but that tender thing, they never let you get to it. But with MDMA assisted therapy, the amygdala is completely quieted down, right? The fear center in the brain is shushed. That is what oxytocin does. Shh, calm down. It's okay. And oxytocin quells the amygdala, quiets down the fear response, and then it increases this openness, trusting, bonding. But also, oxytocin enables neuroplasticity. So it is really a time where the brain can make new connections and sort of change the loops and change the circuitry. And you see this also with psilocybin, with ayahuasca, with DMT, with LSD. All these psychedelics, what do they have in common? Neuroplasticity. They all enable neuroplasticity. They enable this sort of rewiring. One of the metaphors is kind of, shaking up the snow globe.
Right. Someone agrees.
I'm like, really?
There's agreement.
I don't know if there's other metaphors, but we'll wait a sec. Feel free to ask your next question.
Well, what role, current training in both the fields of psychiatry and mental health have a certain basis. And, my question is do you feel it's preparing professionals to facilitate in the realm of psychedelics, and and also what role do you see the therapist playing?
So in terms of my medical training, absolutely nothing prepared me for psychedelic assisted therapy. And I would even say that in my medical training, I learned nothing about cannabis, about the endocannabinoid system. So I understand now that they are teaching these things more. They may be teaching the endocannabinoid system a little bit here and there. They're not teaching anything about psychedelics yet in the medical schools. But there are several different training platforms that are being developed to train therapists to do psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, right? We know that there's a CIIS training. MAPS has a training for MDMA-assisted therapy therapists. Compass has a training, USONA has a training, Fluence has a training, Center for Optimal Living, I think, has a training. Right. There's a place called Nautilus Sanctuary, there's a training. Right. People are definitely gearing up. It's like I imagine this little army, of underground therapists. People are getting trained. They have been for years. Therapists know that these are catalysts that are going to help them do their work more efficiently, and they want to get training. They are getting training, but the big question is, when all is said and done, and people and these are FDA approved medicines, will all of these training protocols be sort of grandfathered in so that if you had any of these trainings, go ahead and open up your clinic and get started? Will there be some sort of ruling society that decides which training is appropriate, which isn't? And will we be able to bill insurance companies for this kind of work? Because if you can work with somebody once or twice and then they don't need their daily dose, and they're not going to drink themselves into oblivion, et cetera, the insurance companies will save money when people undergo these procedures. So will they pay for them?
Although that argument still has to be made to them.
It does still have to be made to them.
Because there's a fear that, you're not just talking about the treatment-resistant depression population, but like SSRIs, once they become part of the mainstream, people will come in and they'll self-prescribe or they'll ask for it, right?
Well, there is this element of asking for it that we started talking about. In the 90s, when I first started, when I was a psychiatrist at the very beginning, I had to explain to people what depression was or what anxiety was, or that there were medicines that could help them. People would come to me and say, like, I can't sleep and I'm crying and I feel miserable. What do I do? And I'd be like, oh, well, you have this and you need that. And, there was education going on and hand-holding and, like, destigmatizing. It's okay if you need an antidepressant. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. But, and then it got to the point where people were coming to my office and saying, like, can you tell me whether I should take Wellbutrin or Effexor? Because, my dental hygienist said that she's on this, but my sister-in-law is taking this, and, which medicine's right for me? And that was like the late 90s and early 2000s, was absolutely direct-to-consumer advertising changed psychiatry. And so will that happen again? Will we have people coming in and saying, I've been taking these antidepressants for 10 years, I'm not crazy about them. What else do you have? I heard about ayahuasca, or I heard about ketamine.
My friend just did. Yeah.
So that is already happening, I would say. And I have a biased patient population. So, I can't say that every psychiatrist is experiencing this, but I will tell you that I'm getting emails from my colleagues saying, can you explain this to me? Or can you tell me more about this? Or my patients ask me about that. What should I tell them? So people are asking about microdosing. They're asking about MDMA. They're asking about ayahuasca. All of these things, they're hearing more about it. They're hearing that it's effective.
Yeah, in the medical and mental health field, many of the professionals are unprepared to answer those questions.
Right now, I would say that if you read Good Chemistry, it will help prepare you to have conversations with patients. I would say that Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, was excellent. Yeah. There is a book coming out specifically about MDMA called Listening to Ecstasy that might be helpful to some people. There are more and more. It's funny. I'm moderating a panel of authors of psychedelic books that's happening for Burning Man, and I start looking around, and there's a lot of really good books about psychedelics. It's very easy to educate yourself. There's a website that I really love for reliable drug information that's called Erowid, EROWID, erowid.org. I do these musical podcasts with my family, and I don't want to advertise, so I won't wear. But the one T-shirt that I will put on every once in a while is the Erowid shirt, because I feel very strongly that people need reliable drug information. And people need reliable internet-based information. It's hard to know who to trust. But there's certain websites where that's really curated information. So erowid.org is what I recommend for plant medicines of that nature. And then I really love Andy Weil, and I respect so much the sort of the whole field of alternative medicine that he really helped to sort of midwife in. So drweil.com is also, I think, a really reliable site for nutritional information, supplements information, things like that.
Beautiful.
So the medical model's emerging. You have indigenous communities that have been working with these plant medicines. That's one thing that's really important to understand is that MDMA came out of the labs in 1912 or something.
Yeah, so MDMA does not have the sort of indigenous
but
history
it does come from sassafras,
that psilocybin has, for instance. It is MDMA is related to sassafras and nutmeg, so it does sort of have a natural link, but it is a synthetic chemical. So, but things like ayahuasca or psilocybin, you're talking about hundreds of years and possibly thousands of years of ritualized use and group use. Ayahuasca, there are churches that get together and they drink the tea as a community, and they have very strong community ties. And the people who enter those churches have a sort of a resulting lower incidence of alcoholism and drug addiction. Not only are they having these very potent mystical experiences, but they are also knit into a community, and that really helps people stay healthy. You see this with 12-step programs. Say what you will about these 12-step programs, but there is a lot of love in those rooms, and there's a lot of support in those rooms.
Connection.
And there's community and connection. And so you feel like someone has your back and you feel safe, know? And it is only when we feel safe, this is really important. As long as you're in fight or flight, there's a few things that aren't going to happen. You're not going to learn. You're not open to learning new material or integrating new material. There's not a lot of neuroplasticity going on there. And, your metabolism has shifted over, and your immune system has shifted over into a very particular state where your body does not fix itself or repair itself. It's just revving the engines, it's not filling up the tank. So when you are in the parasympathetic, the other side, it is called rest, digest, repair. It is only when you're in parasympathetic that you can sleep, that you're relaxed enough to have a social relationship or to have sex, or that your body runs any of its self-repair protocols. So it's really bad for our bodies to be in fight or flight, but it's also bad for our social relationships. It's like if there's a fire in the kitchen, you don't stop to like pick up the phone and call somebody. You're just focused on the fire. It's like your social skills just go out the window when you're afraid. And this is what's happening now with COVID too, I've noticed, is that because there's this background fear of contamination, getting sick, contracting a potentially lethal virus, everybody's in fight or flight a little bit more than usual. And our social skills really degrade. And then obviously you have this issue where we're all more isolated than usual. My daughter, who's like 20, she just went back to college, and she was up here for like 4.5, 5 months, just the family. And she's like, Mom, my social skills are like a little rusty. Like I forgot how to be like, bubbly and fun and introducing everybody. And I don't think it's just from misuse. I really think that there is something about being with this constant background hum of distrust. Are you going to get me sick? Where you're just not open. You're not in parasympathetic. We are more in sympathetic than usual. And so we're more isolated, and we're more depressed. Suicide rates are going up. Overdoses are still a huge problem. When I wrote Good Chemistry, it was before COVID, and I talked about 2 epidemics in the book. And the epidemics were the overdose epidemic,
right,
and the loneliness epidemic.
Right.
Those 2 things haven't gone away. They're worse.
They've intensified.
They're exacerbated by this pandemic.
Well, it's interesting. We were saying even, going out and picking up some food today at the market, even when you're connected, even when you're in a social setting, you only see the eyes.
Right.
Right. You have no idea what somebody's expression is.
Right.
People don't connect. You feel the fear, and people go to, opposite corners of the room and wait.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, we're built for picking up social cues. And also, I have to say, it's analog social cues that our brain is built for. So if anybody here has been spending all day on a Zoom call, multiple Zoom calls, multiple faces, and wondering why you're completely exhausted at the end of those calls, it is because your brain is scanning all the time for social cues. You're looking at 8 faces or 12 faces, whatever's on your screen. You're constantly scanning for... am I in the group or am I out? Am I going to get kicked out? Am I going to get expelled? Because, ostracism, back in the cave person days, ostracism meant you were going to die. If you weren't accepted into the group, you weren't going to make it. If people can't share their food, help you find or build shelter, you're going to get picked off if you're not in the herd. Mm-hmm. So we have a very strong instinct to make sure that we're socially okay. And with the herky-jerky sort of video chats and like people's faces freezing and things like that, or some people have a still image and some people it's them. Like you're constantly scanning to see people's faces and am I okay? And so when people are wearing masks, you're really screwed because you don't know if people are smiling or snarling.
You're definitely looking
right?
at the eyes
and
more,
the eyes,
which is interesting.
The eyes don't always transmit everything,
right?
Yeah.
I smile all the time to put people at ease. Right. And I will say when I'm wearing a mask, I will say to somebody, I'm smiling right now. I want you to know because I want you to feel comfortable,
right.
But it's hard to feel comfortable.
I'm thinking as you're talking about, the Hollywood squares on the screen of all of the faces.
Right.
I'm thinking about our kids.
Yeah.
And you magnify that by, 30 kids, 25 kids in a classroom,
right.
all on the screen.
Right. And imagine when you're a kid, you are primed to really worry about social cues when you're an adolescent. And actually, there's really interesting MDMA research that shows that when you give an adult MDMA, there's so much oxytocin that it mimics that adolescent primed for social cues state. So it's a very real thing. Yeah, I mean, in Good Chemistry, I write a little bit about. I had like an experience of ostracism in 8th grade, and it was terribly painful.
Right.
But I wouldn't trade it for anything now, because it set me on a path of where I am today. And I mean, I think a lot of people, like, if my partner Jeremy says this thing that I love, which is that the places where we've been wounded and where we have scars, those are actually some of our strongest places.
Sure.
You know?
Well, that goes back to this whole notion of SSRIs, versus a psychedelic experience, and one thing, sweeping it under the rug and getting by, right? That was the metaphor you used.
Yeah.
As opposed to dealing with it and integrating it and coming into a new relationship to it. Right.
This issue of integration is huge, and I talk about it a lot in Good Chemistry, and it's a word that can be applied in a lot of different ways, right? I mean, when I was a kid growing up in the 70s, integration meant that they bussed a bunch of kids from Boston out to the suburbs to go to school.
Medco program.
Right? Medco, and that was my first experience with integration, was actually forced busing. And I could tell those kids didn't want to be there. Although, I will also tell you, I had some pretty good friends who were coming in there, and it was good for us, I feel like. But integration is like a really sort of trending word, let's say now, in psychiatry and in psychotherapy, and it's this idea that you are going to learn things on one day. Say you have an MDMA-assisted therapy session or psilocybin-assisted therapy session, and you come away with some really profound insights and some very basic tenets or ideas or rules that you want to live by or something, but then you have to actually walk the talk every other day and integrate these things. So it is sort of putting the ideals and the goals into action. That's one version of integration. But another version of integration is just with the self, integrating all the parts of the self. One of the first times I took MDMA, I had a very strong sense that I had all these different sort of personas, and I had to make sure that we were all on the same page, and that there wasn't going to be, that we were a team. However many personas or whatever, I'm not saying I have split personality, but it's just I'm this way with my parents, I'm this way with my friends, of course. But I wanted there to be some sort of unity and, go team, like let's not have any sort of sabotagers, we don't want one person on the team who's screwing up for everybody else,
At least not the one in charge.
and that's integration. It's sort of, and authenticity has a lot to do with integration, I feel like. And Brené Brown really helped me appreciate authenticity and how important it is to staying calm and staying in parasympathetic. That when you're honest with yourself and when you're honest with the people around you about how you feel, it will help to keep you calm. And I often tell my patients, it's so basic, it sounds stupid, but it's like, feel your feelings and then calmly convey your feelings to other people. Like just doing those two things. But that means you have to be in touch with your body. Because how am I feeling? It really comes down to, you notice like, oh, I'm a little clenchy. Maybe my fists are clenched or my jaw's clenched or my chest feels tight. What's going on? What am I thinking or feeling that's got me feeling this way? And sometimes you have to communicate to somebody else, I think I'm feeling this way because of something you said yesterday, or whatever. Jeremy and I have been talking about trying to write a book together about couples and, being a dyad and being connected and how incredibly challenging it is to stay together, to stay married, to stay in the room when you're having a difficult discussion, things like that. But that is also integrating, sort of, integrating him fully into me and my agenda and vice versa. Wish us luck. I think
Good luck. Good luck
maybe in
with
5 years we will have created something,
well,
or killed each other. It's to be continued.
Well, I love there was a piece in the book where you talked about how the words holy, healing, and hail, and all come from this notion of wholeness.
Right.
And I was reading that, and Marcina Hale.
Oh, nice, good name.
So we went there for sure. And then I was thinking about how in Arabic salam, or in Hebrew shalom, right, peace.
Right.
But actually it comes from the root of shlemut, which is wholeness. So it's also integrity.
Yeah, it is also integrity, exactly. Yeah. And I started to get at these ideas quite a bit in Moody Bitches, because I think what women do in particular, and I should say people who have a lot of yin energy, because I understand not everybody identifies as woman or man, and I totally appreciate that. For what it's worth, I identify as tomboy. But this idea of authenticity and integration, it does come down to something I call emotional integrity, right? And emotional integrity means that you are going to be honest with yourself about what you're feeling, and you're going to be honest with other people about what you're feeling. And people want depth. They don't always want to talk about the weather. And, I find that some of where the disconnection and the malaise is coming from is that, yes, we may be having interactions with people, but they're incredibly superficial. And we want some depth.
Right.
But yes, wholeness,
that's vulnerability.
One person can be whole, a couple can be a whole, a family can be a whole, a community can be whole. We could be a whole country, wouldn't that be lovely? Integrated, open, trusting, bonding, it would be lovely. I do talk about politics quite a bit in Good Chemistry. I do get into the biology. The dirty little secret of oxytocin is that it is also sort of responsible for social cohesion and group tribal thinking, which means sometimes oxytocin helps you figure out whether somebody is on your team or on the other team. And so it's not all, touchy-feely and rainbows and unicorns and love and trusting and bonding. It's also, I'm going to protect my children from you, But I do talk about how good group cohesion feels, or how great it feels like, let's say, to be at Burning Man, right, or to be at a concert, to be among like-minded people, and how heady an experience that is. And does that help you understand a Trump rally? That everybody agrees with you, and how incredibly sort of enlarging that can be to be part of a group. So I do talk about left versus right, or liberal versus conservative, and I talk about it a bit in terms of sympathetic versus parasympathetic, and closed versus open. I really think, especially with this election, it really sort of comes down to, do you believe in the democratic process, and do you want most people to have what they need to survive, or are you okay with this sort of fascism, capitalism, where only some people have what they can to survive? And it really comes, to me, it sort of comes down to...
How comfortable are you with inequality?
Yeah. But the thing about oxytocin is, you are in my tribe, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to share my food and my shelter with you. How big can we make the tent? I think the division in America is really discomforting, disquieting to most of us. I think if you're paying attention, it's one of the things that's very upsetting is can't we all just get along? Can't we all just agree? And right now, it seems like we can't. I really look forward to a time when we feel more unified. One of the other titles I wanted to call this book was United States, because these altered states of consciousness are experiences of unity, and they help to heal us, and they help to make us whole. And our United States of America are, it's not feeling very whole and united at the moment, and it's very unsettling.
Well, I think what's interesting about that too is that when you look on the micro-macro, when you're dealing with just a client, you were talking about aspects before, or personality differences, and our ability to have them integrated, is understanding that there may be different parts of us that have woundedness, or that they make sense somehow. They got developed somehow. They don't just come out of nowhere.
Right.
And yet the ability to, and I'm sure you can even talk maybe a little bit about the process of integrating, because the integration doesn't you're not really looking at rejecting that part of you.
Right.
And yet, how do you integrate the shadow part, which can be very difficult to integrate? And how do we do it on an individual level, and then how do we do it collectively?
And it's not a coincidence that as we're talking about politics in the United States of America, you are reminded about shadow work. Because, yes, our leader requires more integration of his own shadow. And I wrote this great essay
in the collective shadow
about Trump having an ayahuasca experience and what that would be like, and you know, what sort of things he would process, and you know, what exactly went on when he was at military school for 5 years, and his mother being absent, and you know, he's got major trauma to work through, and I don't believe he has worked through it, and unfortunately, he's sort of acting in a way that shows that he hasn't processed his shadow side, that he hasn't done this integrative work. Yeah, it is important individually. It is important collectively. I think, you know, seeing the white supremacy, seeing the inequality means that we have a chance to do shadow work. That this country, you know, I write about this in Good Chemistry, that like America has childhood wounding. Every person has childhood wounding, but our nation has childhood wounding. And it is the genocide of the native people, and it is slavery. Like those are our
it's our origin story.
That's our origin story, but we're not superheroes.
Right. Right.
And we also we're also leaving out the Asian, the Chinese, and which were the start of the.
Yes, as a nation, we oppressed many different groups.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just the native population. It wasn't just the black people that we stole from their land, but we also had Chinese immigrants who like built the railroads, and we imprisoned Japanese people. Like
with the opioid as well, was used as a tool for control.
We have done terrible things to all kinds of people, and it's, you know, it is sort of time to pay the piper. It's time to really unearth the trauma and make peace with the trauma, and accept that really happened, and accept some responsibility and do some integration. And I appreciate that. You know, there was somebody who posted on Facebook recently, like, you know, why do I have to atone for the sins of you know, several generations back? Like, I didn't do that. And, you know, I understand, yes, you didn't do it, but you've been reaping the benefits of what they did. And so you still owe something now, you know, and it is a real time of reckoning now. And
and that means that also means freedom, right?
That's the opportunity.
It's an opportunity rather than, I think that's where people can get stuck.
Yeah.
Is it why me? It's a why not?
Right.
You know, the chance and the gift of being the person that can reconcile
I think it's important, you know, to examine unconscious bias and to accept that we all have unconscious bias, and that, you know, however you grew up and whatever stories you were told, that informs how you see things and how you act. But I do, one good thing about our current situation politically, I suppose you could say, is it's bringing things to a head. It really reminds me, this is kind of gross, but it really reminds me of like when somebody has an abscess and an infection, and they may have a lot of pain, but until that, you know, it turns into a boil, you don't really know, you know, where it is. And like once it's a boil, you have to slice it and push all the pus out and get it all out, and then pack it with something. It's disgusting, right? But it's like right now, America, we're just like wallowing in pus. You know, we have a chance to really address the abscess. You can very clearly see, oh gosh, look, this is happening because of this. You know?
And it's fascinating that psychedelics are coming out right at this time.
I don't think it's a coincidence. It's like desperate times call for desperate measures. And we need a shift in the way that we do things and the way we think about things. And really it is, you know, I know this is cliche and trite, but it really is a shift from me to we thinking, you know, that this sort of I got mine, you get yours sort of thinking, you know, you're on your own. That's, you know, it's not my, that sounds like a you problem, not a me problem, right? I mean, that is sort of the quintessential anti-socialist sort of way of thinking about it. You know, I'm gonna take care of me, and you know, you're on your own. But I think that for a lot of people who have psychedelic experiences, when you have this sense of oneness and connectedness, and we're all in this together, and we're all riding the same planet together, this idea of separation is really an illusion. You know, we're not separate. We're connected. We are all like one organism. And what you do to yourself, you do to somebody else, and you know, you can't separate it off.
And I just want to go back a little bit just to the political part, because, you know, I do think it's really important that we've created a division between Democrats and Republicans, and, you know, how do we own it collectively and not put it on a party or a person, understanding that we are collectively creating this together.
Well,
in this way.
I do think what's happening now, which is good, is that people are getting sort of past left and right, Democrat, Republican, and now they're just like, are we going to enable fascism, or are we going to enable democracy? And so there are people who are Republicans who are opting for democracy, you know? So, I mean, maybe that will shift things.
Yeah.
It's, you know, I never used to talk about politics in my office with my patients. It just didn't come up. Before 2016, politics hardly, I mean, a little bit with like Bush and Cheney, a little bit of complaints back then. It's funny now. You
Looks
think about
pretty,
what you complained about. Oh my God, it was so terrible.
I'm nostalgic for those times.
I'm going to move to Canada, you know. It's like, but now it comes up all the time. Like my patients, and whether they are left or right or liberal or progressive or conservative, it doesn't matter. People are upset. People are concerned. There are terrible things happening, and because of the internet, because we are on our phones 24/7, we are exposed to so much trauma. We are exposed to other people's traumas all around the world every day.
It's what leads.
That's gonna right. If it bleeds, it leads. But that's really what's gonna take its toll. Is that, and this is what what I wrote about in Moody Bitches was, and Good Chemistry also was like, put down your phone, close your laptop, go outside, be in nature.
Right.
But I was also like, hug people, cuddle, have sex, So some of the advice you have to take with a grain of salt, but a lot of it really still stands. It's like, spending all this time on our laptops and phones, exposing ourselves to how terrible things are and how traumatic things are, we end up in fight or flight. Like, it's not good for our bodies. Mm-hmm. We're not designed to share traumas of everyone around the world. We're like, if this were caveman, cavewoman time, maybe you would be exposed to one earthquake in your lifetime, and that would be the biggest trauma of your life. But every day now, you can,
every storm,
you can,
the fires in California, the hurricanes down.
So it's like, McLuhan, I think, has this quote, about like wearing our nervous system on the outside of our bodies now, like with media, that, instead of you just getting the information from, 12 feet around you, you're getting it from the entire globe. We're not built to take on, I am not built to take on the woes of the world. It weighs heavily on me.
Well, William James says emotion is preparation for action. So if we're constantly being pushed to that state, we're always in that fight or flight.
Right, like I'm about to. I'm gonna go fight this in a second.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I do want to tour a little bit just back into culture, because we do know, like, even in the war on drugs, it was used both for financial reasons, that drugs were scheduled. But also a big part of it was cultural and racism.
Yes. Well,
and just to tie into that, in the medical system as well, it has a history of issues around racism and cultural oppression in different ways. And how do you want to maybe address that in the context of psychedelics coming up now? And
so there's a lot there. When I edited a book called The Pop Book, and I talked a lot about the history of prohibition and how it is really rooted deeply in xenophobia and racism, and then also greed, basically, and that all still stands now. One of the things that's coming up now that I really like people talking about is how traumatic it is to be a person of color. And that there's such a thing as racial trauma, and even if you've never been attacked or raped, you are traumatized just by being a marginalized person. So, and I know that MAPS in particular is really trying to train Black and Indigenous people of color to be therapists, and they're actively trying to recruit BIPOC people to be in these studies. It turns out it's a very white field and male. And if you watch most documentaries about psychedelic medicine, you will see a bunch of white men. And one of the things that was very important to me to do in Good Chemistry was to profile the women. There are women, absolutely. Right behind the men.
Well, I was going to say, if you're talking about couples, you have Anna and Sasha Shulgin. You have Christina and Stan Groff. You have...
or even like Alex and Allison
Gray
are also like a really great.
Right, and yet
I was going to say male female therapy pair, but that's not exactly what they do. But really, when it is mostly white and mostly male, but there are tons and tons of women who are actively involved in psychedelic research. They just don't get profiled.
Right.
They don't. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I loved Fantastic Fungi is because they actually had women, who weren't just the patients or the clients, but they were the researchers. Like, yes, there are women researchers, and in Good Chemistry, I made a point of interviewing a lot of women researchers for this book. Because they're out there and they deserve to be profiled. So I am sort of straying away from these issues of demographics. There's plenty of work to be done, right? I mean, one of the things that I do is if I see, there's a lot of conferences now that are springing up online, and I will email them and be like, gentlemen, I don't know if you noticed, but you have a 12-person panel and they're all men, and, you may want to think about inviting some women to this, stuff like that, or, this looks very white, or the optics aren't very good. We need people of color, we need more women, but they are.
We can do a shout out to Bia.
Yeah, so Bia
Chacruna.
Labache heads up an organization called Chacruna, 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 and I believe it's chacruna.net. But they are actively trying to make these women and people of color available for conferences. Like, do you need a list? Here's the website where you can actually see, like, yes, there are women available for your documentary and for your conference, and there are people of color, and there are people who are gender fluid, and we all have to just sort of pay more attention, especially now these days when people, these conferences, these psychedelic webcasts and things like that, they are popping up left and right. It shouldn't just be like the same handful of white guys every time.
Yeah, well, we were talking, I was in the field for about 12 years and really did not have connection with very many women, and it was really difficult, and I really appreciate the women's group that Bia's put together as well.
I did too,
so
yeah.
It was very interesting conversations sometimes. So
I like that very much.
And we did do, with Fantastic Fungi, an interview with all women on the panel, and
it's not just male dominated, but you look at, there's a lot more capital coming into the psychedelic world.
Yes, definitely. People want to invest, and they don't know where to put their money.
Exactly, a lot more commercial interests. And it is all within a medical model. And it's interesting because you talk very openly about psychedelic experiences, sort of a bridge in both worlds, right? And as all of these things are re-emerging in the labs, right? They had a history before they were shut down in the war on drugs, and they're now coming back. But there's been, over all of those years, there's been an underground psychedelic movement work that's going on.
Right. The entire time, like in the background, there has always been underground work. Since the 50s, 60s, 70s, since some therapists and psychiatrists were getting LSD shipped to them from Sandoz, there has been underground work going on. And that's really what's driving the research, is that the anecdotal data is very strong. Right. That from the underground therapy, we know that these are catalysts for behavioral change and for neuroplasticity and for healing, like deep emotional healing. And so since we've seen this in the underground community, that's what spurs on the research, really. And then in the process of legitimizing it and making it medical and getting FDA approval and training these therapists, what happens to the people who've already been working for 10, 20, 30 years? Right. Do they get grandfathered in? I hope they do. They should. I think if you can make a case that you've been doing this work for X number of years, maybe you can do an abbreviated training program or something, or maybe, who's going to accredit people, right? Is there going to be an accrediting body? Who knows? These are, and this idea that
these
capital's
are important
coming
conversations.
It's absolutely important. This is all sort of in its infancy, and just like cannabis had a green rush and a lot of money came in, and it took a little while to figure out who the real players were and who was just like bogus money. It's the same thing with psychedelics. Like right now, I think there may only be one. Like if you wanted to buy a stock, say, because you want to invest in psychedelic medicine, I think right now there's only one company, and that's MindMed. I don't think that there are public companies yet. There will be.
There are a couple smaller ones in the Canadian exchange.
Okay.
But
this is going to end up
almost
being, another green rush. I don't know what to call it.
Well,
a fungal rush. That sounds like a rash, perhaps. I don't know, but
I just want to say, for the people that are not as familiar with this field and understanding what underground therapy is too, is there was one of the leaders in the psychedelic field who has since passed away, made a statement one time that it was used to be illegal to hide Jews during the Holocaust, but does that mean you don't do it? And so the reverence that we have for the underground comes from the courage that is taken to be able to be there during a time where they have had to do this work in a way, and that has putting their own lives sometimes on the line to help people where they cannot get these substances or this work otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I have tremendous respect for people who are doing this kind of work because it is illegal and they're risking quite a bit. But I gave a lecture once on the ethics of psychedelic medicine and the ethics of psychedelic research. The whole lecture ended up being this idea that actually it's unethical to withhold this from patients. Like, people are killing themselves slowly or quickly.
Right.
And there is actually relief for a lot of the suffering that's going on. And so it's, we owe it to people who are suffering to give them this balm that can really help them feel better. And feel better on a much deeper level than the sort of Band-Aids that psychiatry has been offering for decades.
So this is really, we're set up for not just a renaissance in psychedelics, but really a transformation in the field of mental health, like perhaps that we have never even experienced before.
We need one. And boy, we're really going to need one now more than ever. I mean, my patients are doing badly. Back in like April, May, there was a little bit of like a honeymoon period where people seemed to, like, I can handle this. It's okay. I'm cleaning out my closets. I'm getting things done. It was okay. But that's gone. The honeymoon period is for sure over. I think a lot of us can feel it. I have patients who are, drinking too much or eating too much or smoking too much or just terribly depressed. Suicide attempts are up. Suicide rates are up. Overdoses are still a huge problem. The prescriptions for anti-anxiety meds is going up and up. The label of anxiety is being given to more and more children.
Right.
And these children are getting medicated. And it's just terrible. There's a quote about if, that if you are in an unhealthy society and you are healthy, that's something is wrong. It's like we're trying to accommodate and adjust to a very unhealthy, toxic way of living by propping people up pharmacologically. Well, we really need to be making systemic changes in how we live and who we are.
Well, and understanding that the depression and anxiety could be appropriate responses to what we've created and what we're living into.
Completely. Yeah. In the beginning of the pandemic, I had people saying, like, I'm crying every few days, and I type back, so am I. Like, you should. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So I just want what as a call out to people, what do you suggest that they do to further the field, to be able to support this kind of work in our culture?
I think to further the field, if you can donate, there's a lot of research going on that needs public funding. This is not government-funded research. This is not big pharma-funded research. All the psychedelic research, all the MDMA-assisted therapy research, it's all happening with private donations. So MAPS.org, MAPS.org, Hefter.org, HEFFTER, these are sort of the non-profit or not-for-profit groups where they really need donations to help fund clinical research.
And I think, one of the things I always suggest people to do, too, is to talk to other people about it, and especially their mental health providers.
Right. I think, first of all, people need to out themselves. I feel very strongly. This is like Harvey Milk said, like, if you want rights, you have to stand up and say you're gay, right? You want cannabis to be legal, you want psilocybin to be legal, you have to stand up and say, I use these things and they're helpful to me. I think that's really important. Like, if you can, you must. If everybody outed themselves about their own psychedelic use, it would really move things forward. So that's one thing. That's a way that people can help. And yeah, talk to other people about it. just sort of sharing articles and books, or if you see a conference and you post it and you let people know that you think this is a thing, and there's articles now in like Wall Street Journal and Forbes. I mean, the cat's out of the bag.
60 Minutes, the
right.
Today Show.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I first came upon it with an article from National Geographic on ayahuasca way back in the...
Yeah. We know, I know that there is a lot of efficacy there, that you're talking about wellness and wholeness and healing. And I know that these, plant medicines and fungal-based medicines, they are going to be used more and more. And they are cost-effective, and they are not physiologically toxic. So it is happening. It's going to happen. And I think anything that we can do to sort of speed healing, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of pain, and we could be doing more to make people feel better. And also, it will help the economy. Depression and anxiety take a huge toll out of the economy, where people cannot be productive.
Right.
So it is cost effective. I really do believe eventually these medicines will be covered by insurance, the same way that if you needed surgery, anesthesia would be covered. It is like anesthesia for surgery. It is a catalyst to make therapy more effective, faster, more efficient. Good psychotherapy takes years and years and years, and the insurance companies are paying for somebody to go once a week, twice a week, for years and years and years.
Right.
So in the long run, it's cheaper to do this.
Yeah.
Right.
So what you're really talking about is to normalize it, to be sharing people's stories, to normalize that this is something that is appropriate, something we can talk about,
yeah,
something that's coming.
Right, and to model healthy behavior. Because, I say the same thing with cannabis. Like, if I have dinner with the kids and I have a glass of wine and they see me have a sip or two and I leave half the glass there or whatever, but I'm modeling healthy drug-taking behavior in that situation. I don't have a chance to model healthy drug-taking behavior if it's illegal and I have to hide it. And anytime you hide anything, you're over in fight or flight, right? You've got adrenaline and cortisol, and there's like more of a rush because you're hiding it. It actually ends up being more addictive.
More addictive.
If you have to hide it, if you have shame around it, it is going to be more addictive. So the more that we can be out in the open, not have shame, not hide it, destigmatize it, normalize it, the faster this whole sort of train will move along the track. But it's left the station. It is moving. It is going to happen, and it is sorely needed in psychiatry.
Well, you're doing amazing work in that regard, and we so appreciate everything that you're doing. Good Chemistry, Ecstasy, Moody Bitches, your other books, and all that you're doing out in the world, Julie, to keep that train moving. So thank you.
It is absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me and being had.